And we're live, Megan and I. This is our first time. I met Megan through TLC, and I just discovered in an earlier stream today on the Chris Howard stream that you're a recovering Catholic. Was that what you said about yourself, or was I confusing you with someone else?
I guess I was remarking on something that Chad was saying about this new thing that people were calling themselves in like the new modernist society, that they're like a recovering Catholic because of all the promises that we had from Catholicism that we, I guess, didn't end up getting. And then I think most of my generation seems to have like stepped away from their religion. And so the theme was, oh, we're recovering from all the things, all the promises that we've had, like thought that we were going to have, and that we don't have anymore. So we like needed like a label. I wouldn't say that I am a recovering Catholic anymore. I think that was just what the verbiage that was given to me for such a long time. It's like, oh, if you're going to step away.
You have recovered.
Well, life is a recovery, I think, just in general. And so I'm trying to find myself in different ways, which is actually part of the reason why I wanted to talk with you, just because, I mean, if I'm going to be brutally honest with you, you and the way that you speak and the conviction that you have, like, scares the crap out of me, because I think that I told myself that you're supposed to have certain convictions about your faith, and you're just supposed to like blindly walk through the world for so long. And I stepped away from that like way of thinking, that anyone who has conviction is like a weird trigger point for me. So like for me, this type of conversation, I just want to, I don't know, I'm curious as to how you have such conviction about something that you like can't really know, or at least that's my perspective of like, how can you have that much conviction? Because I feel like I lost that sense of conviction a long time ago, and I don't know if that's something I'm trying to get back, but I think this is why I'm in this space, is to sort of rediscover myself. And so interacting with you, I'm always impressed by that conviction and also terrified by it. So.
I suppose if you hadn't asked me that question, my next question for you would be, what were the promises made to you? And surely it is part of faith to not have all the promises given to you in this lifetime, because it's in the afterlife. And that would be my question for you. But I will certainly answer your question now about conviction. So I keep reminding people that I'm agnostic. So I'm certainly not saying, there is an afterlife and, or even God, but I'm saying my conviction is that religion obviously serves a purpose to frighten us, really. And I think it is to frighten people of all nations and races into becoming married parents and sticking with their choice, and not, casually leaving their marriage. And that, I think, is the whole construct of religion, of all the religions that support marriage. That it's what it's meant to do, to shame people into, well, if you want to have sex, there's only one kind of sex you can have, and it's with your spouse, who must be a member of the opposite sex, not within the forbidden degrees of consanguinity, and that's it. That is really it. And but I know that Westerners, having been through the swinging 60s and 2 world wars, their Christianity might have been disrupted and replaced by a new religion that they haven't quite acknowledged is their new religion, which is liberalism, and that incorporates, at the end of the day, intersectional feminism, also known as woke, which I perceive to be not quite the thing, and increasingly more and more Westerners are rejecting it because they see the harm that it has done to them. But my fundamental position is that this is what my conviction is, that religion, and I know it annoys the hell out of Chris, that all these constructions of religion were about frightening women of childbearing age and men of fighting age to marry and be good parents.
No, I think you're right about that to a large extent. I think and I guess this sort of goes to how I think I would have answered your question prior to, is I feel like consequence is a big part of how you instill this fear that I think you're talking about. And I think when I talk about the promises that I was never given is more like the promises that there would be consequence. And I think I'm just realizing that in this new age of I don't know, just existing in the world, there's not a lot of consequence, even in at least in what I saw in my religious practices, for example, I like to give this example of we would go to church, we would go to mass, we'd be all lovey-dovey in front of each other in mass, and then we get into the parking lot and everyone's beeping and cursing at each other, and it's what did we learn there? Where was the consequence of not living the practice of what we were just talking about? And I think that's what I mean when I say you can just use this overarching label of this is good, and call yourself this label and say this is good, and not actually act that way in the world. And then there was no consequence to that because you can just keep coming back to this label. And so then these labels just sort of fell off for me. I was just how can you claim this? What does this even mean anymore if it's not going to be a living practice? And so I think that's what I mean is the consequence. And then I think that sort of relates to this whole fear thing. I don't feel there is no fear. I feel there's not a lot of fear, and therefore there's not a lot of respect, because I think respect comes from a place of fear with understanding
of consequences.
And so without that little bit of fear, I don't see a lot of respecting these sorts of larger ideas. And so for me, I'm trying to learn how to respect when I can't see consequences anywhere. And that's I don't know, that feels in bad faith, me saying these things or labeling myself as these things, because I don't feel I've yet understood what true fear and true respect is. And that's a humbling experience to go through. So,
yes, but I think with Christianity, there was a kind of mutation as it made its Atlantic crossing, because all the institutional structures of enforcing Christianity in Europe no longer existed in the New World, and the consequence of that is basically churches have become social clubs, and social clubs cannot maintain morality because, to the extent that, they try to be exclusive, they will say, well, what are the rules for, being a member of the social club? Obviously you can't be a criminal. But if the law keeps saying that things that used to be considered to be sexual offenses are now the human rights of Americans, how can you actually even enforce that or even make that point in a social club? Because the social club would have the purpose of keeping its members and saying, well, let's not talk about that because it's divisive and we'll only fight. So let's, sing, let's do other things to distract us from, the moral question, the moral and religious question of not doing what your religious book says you're supposed to do or what your ancestors were observing. So I think that is the great difficulty. And being Americans, you have this additional problem of, the church being separated from the state. So, anybody, I think Jews and Muslims will say, oh, but, this law that you passed saying we can do this thing, well, our holy book says no, it's a sin. And Congress will say, well, we make the laws, and there is a separation of church and state. And on the question of established religions, which we reject, which they reject in its entirety. So what can you do but to turn to politics? But then politics is such a minefield and so divisive. And what I've heard through listening to TLC is that Americans talk about blue church and red church. I mean, since when did Christianity think in terms of colors of elephants and donkeys? So I think it is a problem that will be difficult to resolve unless more history is considered. And I think I'm in difficulties here because I can quote as much as I want about what George Washington said about indulging with caution the supposition that morality cannot be maintained without religion. But I'm faced with, well, he's just a dead white man. Who cares what he says now? From many Americans who do also complain about their government. So, but when you talk about consequences, I suppose my mind says, well, aren't Americans supposed to respect their founding fathers? And if they don't respect their founding fathers and what they used to say and think, aren't they being un-American? But I've noticed that Americans no longer accuse each other of being un-American, which is a kind of American way of saying, you're a traitor, you're a subversive, you're, low status, and we shouldn't listen to you. Different weapon words are being used now.
Yeah, a lot there. I guess the thing that I'm noticing, and like obviously, the United States is a very big place, and I'm like, a 31-year-old like cis white woman, so like I have my own perspective, right, on like what's going on, but I truly feel as though the way that people are using those, like what I was calling before, like labels, like I feel like we're saying things and using phrases for things and that we don't know what they actually mean. And you talk about like history and like how there's like meaning behind the things that we're doing and the policies that are in place. And like, to a large extent, I really respect that because like things are coming from something else. Like things are not just like popping up out of nowhere. They're like developing in relation to other things. And I think the way that we are using these labels that have these like deep rooted like history, but then ignoring the history means we're actually not using the labels correctly. And so I find that like, well, I don't know, I just find that we're like talking about things foolishly and then we're not speaking the same language anymore. And so we're just hiding behind the labels and not actually digging into what they like mean in the first place. So I think that for me is what I see a lot of confusion. I'm sorry?
But they're just weapon words, kind of playground taunts.
Because they're tools. Because like if you take the soul out of it,
Yes.
it's just an object, right? And so yeah, I think we're just throwing them back and forth. They're like, oh, look at mine. Oh, look at mine. It's like, but like, what does that mean? And then no one gets anywhere, and then everyone's bruised and bumped and mad, and they don't know why. And so I think if we like actually had some substance to what we were saying and we like knew what we meant when we said it, I think it would be a totally different conversation. And so that's why I think a lot of our conversation seems to be very shallow. Even if we're using very rich words, I can almost tell that the words that they're using particularly are fine, but the meaning under that is lost. And so how do we find the meaning behind it, and then we can actually get into the conversation, so the actual meat of the conversation.
Well, yes, I think. Sorry, I think there's a bit of a delay, which I don't mean to talk over you, but I think yes, we can use these weapon words, but there is a way of dealing with these accusations. Like, well, you called me racist, misogynist, fascist. What do these words mean? It never comes down to saying, well, define it, and then I will see if I fit that definition, you know. And people never slow right down to say, what does this word that you are using as a weapon against me mean? And because it seems to be, I called you it first, therefore I win, which is the typical playground tactic. I called you stupid first, and you're calling me stupid back, but I win because I called you stupid first. And that's as childish as it can be, in my view.
And
And what I'm trying to say is that being legally trained, these words mean a lot, and clients have been known to spend lots and lots of money to get their legal representatives to argue in favor of what they want that word to mean. And this is how we must proceed at the end of the day. What does it mean to be, un-American or racist or fascist or misogynist or, whatever word they're using against you, because you need to break it down and detoxify it and maybe say, well, you shouldn't have used that word on me at all because it doesn't apply. I'm not the it that you're calling me.
I think this gets back to, I mean, I guess this is something that I've heard you say in the past of like, you don't like the chit chat. And I'm sorry if I'm using like a phrase that like is probably not actually correct, but I think that's why the chit chat part of interacting with people.
I'm guilty as charged.
I think it's helpful because
yes,
like I think even like the word, we were talking a little bit earlier in the stream about like, motherhood, fatherhood, all that kind of stuff. And like even the idea of like the word like baby, like for someone who has a baby or has had a baby or lost a baby or has seen a baby or just has seen a picture of a baby, like all of those ideas of what a baby is different in all of those like people. And so like getting into the nuance of who that person is gives you a deeper representation of what they would think of when I use the word baby. And so I think we don't realize that that is for every single word that we use. It's about that like perspectival knowing of that word. And I think that's why, at least for me, I'm still more along the same lines of like how like Luke gets into the like persons of the thing. It's like, I think that's helpful because then I like know what you're talking about when you say the word baby, or at least a little bit better. And I know how it differs from my version. And I think people are just assuming that baby means the same thing to everybody. And that's just not the case.
Yes, so, people might think they are using the same word to discuss the same subject, but they have, different definitions of the word. So that's why it's important to, actually slow right down and ask about the meaning of words. And this becomes philosophy. And, maybe people prefer to do their chit chat, rather than discuss philosophy. And and even the chit chat is helpful to me because it helps me understand the different characters of TLC. And I think you're all very brave for showing your faces and revealing so much of yourselves, because you are making yourselves vulnerable. But then it is a respectable and educated and aspiring community who that wants to solve problems. And of course these problems affect the rest of the world, and ultimately I think all the problems going on in the Middle East is is fundamentally a religious war, between, Jews and Christians and Muslims who are saying, well, our way to God is better than, the others. And I think it would be nice to be able to resolve these things peacefully and civilly, hopefully, by just talking about these things. And I think TLC has really been, enormously helpful in attempting to discuss these things. I suppose, I'm just here thinking, I know the answer, and, here it is. And it's like, no, go away, please, go, and there isn't a problem, or it's not that bad, and, et cetera, et cetera. So I suppose that's that's my excuse for seeming difficult at times. But I think these matters are urgent in that if you don't resolve them, they just get worse.
What would you say you mean when you say like resolve these issues? Do you mean like being able to come out of the conversation, tie the bow, and say here's what it is, or what do you mean by that? Like getting closer to something, or like actually fundamentally getting that nugget, if that makes sense?
Yes, it does, because what I find is somebody complains about their government, and then I go in and say, well, this is a solution, and then the next response is, there is no problem. After all, there is no problem, because because really, I would rather die than adopt your solution. So I think we get this sort of pattern of behaviour of complaining about the problem, being offered a solution, rejecting the solution, and then denying the problem, and then the behaviour will repeat itself again, and this is what I've find in my conversations on the internet.
This is reminding me of, I think, something that we were talking about, or like I was chatting about while you were on the live the other day, of like people don't want to actually see the problem, because then they'd have to take accountability for their part in the problem and then take responsibility for correcting that problem. There's like a lot of inability to be able to see themselves in the problem. And I think what I would say to that is that like it might not be your fault, but like it's all of our responsibilities. And so like I don't know why we have to take fault in it necessarily and shame ourselves in it, but we do have to realize it, or else we can't do anything about it. And so that's, I think, the biggest part for me is like there's an accountability issue when it comes to that next step that I feel like you're talking about. Is that correct to say?
Yes, because, well, I suppose ultimately it's admitting that we're wrong, and of course it's difficult to admit that we're wrong, and worse than that, action is required, and we don't want to take that action. So there are all these sort of layers of well, it's not that bad. What can I do about it anyway? I'd only get into trouble. My friends might not speak to me anymore. I might lose my job. All kinds of obvious problems, because the culture war is so wide and so deep. And it's obviously not just Americans who are suffering it. I mean, Europeans, and because really, fundamentally, it is a religious war, and liberalism is also a religion, because the way these liberals behave, they are calling conservatives heretics in their own way, and obviously, all these accusations of hate speech are blasphemy to liberals. How dare you reject all the, benefits and fruits of liberalism? How dare you? We've given you so much. How bloody dare you, say you don't want it anymore? I think that is the instinctive reaction of liberals who see their offerings of, UBI and sexual liberation and a culture of, well, sex and drugs and rock and roll being, well, increasingly rejected.
I think this is another one of those circumstances where like we can't take accountability, because again, it goes back to the almost like the consequences thing. Like, if we don't take accountability, then there are no consequences. And there's like something about the way that we're almost like, again, like ignoring what's actually going on and telling our stories about, oh, but we're in the right, we're on the right side of history. We're on the right side of the decision. And so then we can't take accountability for the flip side of the coin that we're seeing in front of our faces that's causing us stress. Like, that's not the stress that we caused. And so we can't take accountability for that. And therefore the consequence, again, sort of like goes off into the wind, and it's projected out into society. It doesn't go away. But I just think that there's this underlying inability to actually accept what is right in front of us, because it takes integrity to say that you're wrong. It takes like some sort of moral understanding that we're all involved in this. And I don't know, I think that's really energetically very hard for people, especially because we don't have that. I don't know how it is in like a lot of the European culture, but at least in America, I feel like we're just all so spread out, and we don't live in villages and communities anymore. And even like there's like no consequence in that, because if you do something bad in your small little village, you're like shunned. But now you can just move on to the next online village or the next whatever group chat you want to be a part of. Like, it doesn't matter. And that's where I see that's where I get worried, is I'm just seeing that people can just sort of move on without it actually mattering. But then they're feeling the intense anxiety of all this stuff is still there. We haven't talked about it. We haven't gotten into it. Nothing is being resolved, but we're just saying, oh no, it's not there. We're not going to look at that. It's like, okay, well, generations down the line are just going to have mental health issues, and we're going to say it's their fault, not ours. It's like, how do we live it? How do we sleep at night thinking about that? I don't know. People don't. That's the point. They don't think about it, or they don't sleep.
Or they medicate themselves. But you talk about the illusion. Well, we have an abundance of choice, which gives us the illusion of choice. But maybe we don't want all these choices to confuse us, because if you had to take a multiple choice test, I mean, it's bad enough if you're only guessing and there's only A to D. But if it's A to Z, as Americans would say, then if you had to do it, I think it's a guessing game, and by the time you finish your exam, you will be almost certain that you must have failed it. You must have failed your multiple choice test that goes from A to Z, because at some point you got bored looking down the list of 26 options, and you just chose one randomly. And by the end of it, yeah.
I also think in that same regard, like I love the analogy of like, it's pick A, B, or C, and then someone can say, well, I think the answer is D, even though D isn't part of the options. There's like something about being able to see, maybe it is D when there's only 3 other options, but if there's the distraction of A through Z of options, you never can even imagine that there could be a 27th option. Like, there's no way there could be another one. And I think that's more along the psychology of what's happening, is look at all these options you're given, and we're going to distract you, because like you're not going to be able to see that there might be a different option that you'd have to create. But that's my thinking, if that makes any sense.
Yes. So we are made to treat our relationships as disposable, even family relationships, even though we've only got one, set of parents and, one set of extended family members, because we don't need them anymore. And, we can go online and talk to our, internet friends. And, but yes, at the end of the day, it's only people who know us and see the flesh and blood of us who will actually, come and help when we're really in trouble. And it's usually family members. But I see that in America, you are very far from your own family. So I suppose, all these issues would have troubling consequences for our identity, because the only way that we can kind of affirm our own identity, which is what we do online all the time. I say this thing, do you agree with me? And if you don't, I'm going to fight you. But at least it would, say, well, I'm a person who always says this, and I oppose a person who says the opposite. And this confirms our identity and our tribe. And this is how we, choose to exist, because it seems we have no choice now because of the, atomization of society. But, it seems a shame that for Americans these days, they have to move and sell their house every time they want, a decent job. That's the impression I get from from TLC. Which is a terrible way of living. I mean, why can't states, make a point of saying, well, we've got all these people in our state. Let's make it a point to make sure it's, self-sustaining, and no one in, a particular state has to move away just to get a decent job. And it seems that the government doesn't care. It seems more concerned with starting another war, or pretending to be a president who doesn't want to start another war, and then start another war anyway. And yes, I think, ultimately, it does relate to politics and how government behaves. But because representative democracy is a totemic of liberalism, that's going to be also very difficult to shift. Because I never tire of reminding Americans that Washington warned against political parties, and he did predict what would happen if these unnecessary divisions introduced by amoral political tribes were allowed to take over political discourse, until churches are now divided between blue and red.
I also think that the size of a nation is incredibly important when it comes to these sorts of things too. I think personally, I mean, I don't even know how to involve myself in the idea of politics when it comes to the United States, because for me, it almost feels like, this is going to sound terrible, but it almost feels like mimetic. It doesn't feel real at times. And I think, again, that sort of falls into the category of there's not a lot of felt consequence of I don't even know how I would involve myself in these things unless it was on a super, super small scale in my neighborhood, in my, like I said, in a village, but we don't have those. And so there's this really embedded disconnect in what I feel is in American Western culture right now, that you just feel so disconnected that you can't find your way in to make it meaningful for you. And without meaning, it literally doesn't matter. And that's what I'm worried about, is that I don't know how to make it, that's my struggle. I don't know how to make it matter, even for me. And I feel like it matters. I feel like there's something there. I don't know what that matter looks like, because it's so big, and there's so many different pathways you can go down. And again, it's those options of A through Z, and I'm more confused. The halfway down, I read the options, and then I give up, and I'm oh, I failed. Oh, it doesn't matter. I'll take another test tomorrow. It's this weird, non-connected, that I think is the most worrisome for me, because then we can't do anything about it.
Well, I'm saying it's really not that hard. I mean, people think of, engaging in politics oh, I have to start, becoming councillor, or, get involved in local politics. But I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying, find a political conviction if you haven't got one, and just defend it. It's well, and argue with people about it, just so you know if you're right or wrong, whether you can defend that position or not. And I think most people fear to do even that, and that I think, is the problem, in that people think there's no point discussing it. And actually, I sympathize with your position, because I have a friend who says, well, what's the point of talking about politics? You get angry, friendships may be broken, and you're nowhere nearer to solving the problem. So I refuse to let anyone discuss politics at my parties. So that was her position. And in a way, I do sympathize with that. But then you are assuming failure from the beginning if you take that attitude.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think you're right about that. I think, like, I don't want to be in that position of assuming failure and just saying, oh, no one can talk about these specific topics at my dinner party. Like, that's like what I think I fear is a next step in the lack of meaning that I or lack of mattering that I feel like I feel. And it's like I'm trying to somehow not avoid that, but realize that that's a potential outcome if things like this don't matter. But I don't know if I'm like, it's almost like I don't feel like I'm equipped to have these types of conversations. I feel like I can talk about it in a very like philosophical or almost like biological needs sort of perspective. But when it comes again to these like labels and these ideas, they have so much history that, I mean, I think you've spoken on this before, that like I don't know a lot of my own history, like one in my family, but then also like of the United States, and like what, like, because the winners write the history, right? And so I've gotten a history that is probably very different than the history that I think people in other countries know about. And so like I guess I'm just trying to, maybe it's a fear response for me, like maybe I'm worried I'm going to get caught in a circle and I can't get out of it, or I'm going to be told that I'm wrong, because like, we love we hate being told that we're wrong, but I just don't know if I'm appropriately able to have those types of discussions, and if we're supposed to, if we don't feel equipped to, whether it's fear or actual equipped. Yeah.
Well, I think those of us who don't feel confident can just ask questions the way Socrates did. But I mean, obviously, we also know what happened to poor old Socrates, being, going around asking his annoying questions. But you don't have to make a political speech and get on your soapbox. You can ask reasonable questions and see how people respond. And I suppose I'm saying it's easy. It's easy for me because whenever people talk about democracy, I'll just say, well, I don't agree with representative democracy, and I've stated my position, and everybody will, call me names, but I'm saying, well, at least I've stated my position. And if you're going to, are you really going to prove me wrong and say, oh, representative democracy works so well, and we're so happy with it, and blah blah blah. I don't think anybody will try and argue that. They might. They would more likely change the subject, I think. But at least you think in your own mind that you've made your point. They've changed the subject because they don't think they can win on that. And I think questions have a way of staying in the minds of people who refuse to answer them, because it's only one sentence. It's not a long speech, you see. And they will remember, because questions nag at one's conscience, in my view. So I'm not saying, go and try and become president or anything of the sort. It's only, logical next questions that can be remembered easily, because, all questions have only one sentence.
Do you feel like most people should be having these conversations specifically in the political sphere? Like, do you feel like people should be talking about the problems of the world through the lens of politics, or do you think there are other ways of talking about these things? Because it feels like, from my perspective, that you seem to have a very politically based view of like the world, and I think that that's a fair perspective to have. But like, how do you take on other perspectives, or like, do you think that this is the one that actually gets to the nitty and gritty of what's going on and what the issues are?
Well, yes. I mean, you can use, sociology and philosophy to talk about these things, and also theology. If you're religious, because really, at the end of the day, even atheists unconsciously reach out to God when they say things like, "In the best of all possible worlds, such and such a thing would take place." The best case scenario, all these ideas of when if things were working properly and everybody was doing what they were supposed to be doing, you would get this situation. But sorry, I mean, the world isn't like that, so you have to carry on sucking it up. But ultimately, all political discourse is about right and wrong, and good and evil, and even the atheists have their very own idea of what is good and evil, which they won't be able to define or defend. Which I think, for ethical monotheists, they can easily say, well, good is what God commands and evil is what he forbids. That's it, in one sentence.
Interesting. No, that's really interesting. I guess I've always thought of like policy and laws and the way, like I've definitely seen the politics of things being very much like in the, I won't even call it necessarily religious, but I guess I will, but like more like the moral sphere of like all these laws were created with like a spirit under them type of idea. And so my issue is that when we talk about the specific like letter of the laws, I find that there's like a missing, like the spirit of the laws sometimes gets missed. And so like, how do we like talk about both? Or do you think we should talk about both? Because I think that's where I get a little bit like squirrely, is when it's like, okay, yeah, I can, blind obedience, I understand, is like a thing that can happen, but I don't think that's what real moral like goodness in the world like comes from. I think it's like having a structure, but then having morality within that structure. And so I don't know how to talk about both at the same time, or if we should.
Well, I think, for any political system to work properly, there has to be somebody, above, the general, if it's a military organization, giving the orders, and those below following it. And I think Americans have this expression of, there being a problem if there's more chiefs than there are Indians, meaning there are more people wanting to give orders than people, being prepared to follow them. And obviously the patriarchy is basically the only way to resolve this problem, because patriarchy is very, very much like a pyramid. It's sort of, for a child, it would be, well, my older sibling is, senior to me, will have power over me because they're bigger and they're older. And if they really do something bad to me, I could appeal to mum, who is kind of appeal court. And if she doesn't give me the result I want, I can go to the supreme authority, and that's dad. And so in whole families, these ideas are internalized. But if everybody is saying, my ideas are as good as yours, and I'll fight you if, because my irrational emotions and my, illogical arguments are better than your illogical arguments and your irrational emotions. And I think we're going to be wasting a lot of time fighting each other. And a lot of these accusations of hate speech is really, I think, the instinctive desire of humans to know where they are in the pecking order. And the reason why even religious people take the rules of hate speech so seriously is because they want to know where they stand in relation to the group that they're in. So if somebody says a wrong word or expresses a wrong opinion, they will be lowered in status, and the person who points this out and wins will be raised in status. And I don't think this human instinct can ever be eradicated. I think the best thing that can be done is to make sure that it's logical and moral to have this system of belief. And ultimately, it is about patriarchy, and it is about social conservatism, and it is about sex. It is about whether we have a right to have sex with people who aren't our spouse, and whether our spouse can be a member of our own sex. And these ideas are now considered to be sacred human rights conferred on them by liberalism, which is actually a religion, though not officially acknowledged as such.
No, this is all interesting. I think the first thing I'll point to is I like that idea of that structure of the child, brother, mother, father sort of hierarchy, and then ideally the father with an even higher purpose, and therefore that's why we're trusting in him to ultimately be following an even larger, greater good. And I think what I see in our structures, in our institutions, in our political systems, is that there isn't that sort of trust that the highest is looking at something larger and looking out for the best interest of the Indians or whatever. And so I think that's a big thing there. And then this whole liberalism and wokeism, I think is a pretty, I don't know, I would say it seems to have been a dangerous step for our society, just given the fact that there's, I don't know, I like to say it's oh, people are not doing what they think that they're doing in a lot of ways. And I don't know, I feel I could go on a lot about that, but maybe I'll hold my tongue for right now. But I definitely think that there's a lot there that can be talked about. For sure.
Yes, and to expand the idea of patriarchy outside the family, I think there used to be a rule of thumb about how to choose your national leader, and I know I think it was somebody called James Buchanan, who was a bachelor American president, and he was one of the worst American presidents apparently, and so the idea must be that if we're going to choose a president, he has to be a married father, and that would be one of the rules of thumb about how to choose your national leader, even if you're not American. So that man has to. It's usually a man in his 50s. He's got adult children who are a credit to him, who aren't in jail or suspected of doing bad stuff like Hunter Biden. And so you exclude all these people. Obviously you can't be. What is it under the age of 35? That disqualifies you from running for president. You must have lived in the country for 14 years, and I suppose you can't be gay, you can't be a bachelor, you can't be female, and you can't be a father whose children are too young, who aren't adult, and then you can't be a father who has adult children who are not a credit to him, and then you have this final category of these men running for president whose children are a credit to him. So you think, well, at least he's managed to keep his marriage intact and his children seem to be okay, so we might consider voting for him. It's that sort of idea, really, that kind of simplified the choosing of leaders in the olden days.
Right. But I definitely don't think that that's how we choose them now. That's for sure. But yeah, I feel like there's just definitely more
Yes,
about
yes. So
the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law thing. Like, oh, if they say the right things and they say they're going to do X, Y, and Z, that's great. But if their track record shows the complete opposite, oh, we don't care. It's like, where is that boastness that I'm trying to talk about? Like, I think that needs to also be part of the equation, and I think we just completely ignore that nowadays for whatever reason.
yes. So I mean, there seems to be a suggestion that the current president is not um, has had a few question marks about his sex life, and the most famous comment of him was, if you're rich enough, you can grab them by the pussy, and then there were all these women, well, not all, not that many, but some of them said, I wouldn't mind to be grabbed by my pussy, and so it all all these sort of terrible things that might have destroyed his run, were destroyed by these women who were openly admitting that if you're powerful enough, they wouldn't mind, and I'm afraid there are too many women like that, and who knows why occasionally even the best of women might not stray into that line of thinking.
Yeah, I think that's what I mean by there's no consequence. Like, there really is nothing that people can't say or do anymore that you can't tell a story and get
Make
out
a
of.
joke of
And
it.
right, exactly. Because it doesn't matter. There's like a lack of mattering is like what I keep coming back to. It's like, why does this not mean what I think it means? Or why can they just say something and then, oh, it's just the words, it doesn't really matter. It's like wait, no, it definitely matters. Like, everything that you do it's supposed to have like a consequence, and it's just there is nothing like holding anyone to like a higher standard of excellence, and that's how empires fall. Like, I'm just sort of, I guess the time is what, 11:59 type of thing. Like, something is about to give. But
Well, I think well, one of my favorite stories is in the Bible is Jonah. So basically, the story of Jonah was that even if you're a bunch of terrible people, and even if Jonah didn't want to save you, but he was sent there, and they, I mean, the point was that they repented just in time, and they were saved, and that, I think, must be the answer. We mustn't think, oh, we're all going to hell anyway, so there's no point even trying, which I kind of get from a few people, particularly Scott. I really get this feeling from him, like, we're all going to hell, so no, that there's no point doing anything or saying anything, and all we have to do is keep doing what we've always done, which I think is will not help matters, because there is so much in the Abrahamic God and the belief systems created, that give you the option. Yes, you will, but as long as you repent, and you sincerely repent, and you stop heading towards the edge of the cliff, and you think, okay, just think about making a U-turn. Just think about it, even if you don't think you can quite manage it, and then I think it would happen. It's all about, yes. Patterns of belief and patterns of behavior that obviously can be changed, because this is what the government is trying to do. They give us new beliefs to believe in, to change our behavior, and they give us new laws to punish us for following established patterns of behavior, and we need to decide which is good and which is harmful. And I don't think fundamentally it's that hard. It's just uh, the articulation of it when everybody is potentially gunning for you for saying the wrong word and expressing the wrong opinion, and obviously, if you have no convictions, you're not going to be sticking your neck out and saying anything. But I'm saying there is the happy medium of asking a question. and then agree, and then maybe after a bit of a explanation, you will be given a chance to ask another question, such as Socrates must have done, until he annoyed everybody. But I don't suppose any of you will be forced to drink hemlock.
Well, first off, I can't really speak on like Scott's philosophy by any means. But I feel like what you were reminding me of was like, what is it, the Ship of Fools? I don't know if you've like heard or read of that. But this
Please
idea,
remind me.
it's essentially like, the ship. I'm going to totally butcher this, so apologies in advance. But someone who knows about it maybe can give a better explanation. But essentially, this ship is like basically going towards like disaster, and everyone on the ship is saying what they need, particularly in that moment of like, oh, I need better blankets, I need better food, I need to have sex with whomever I want, I need to be seen as this, that, the other. And then one guy's like, actually, I think we should just like turn around because we're about to like hit something huge. And like everyone is so focused on the small little things that they are particularly worried about. And this guy's like, wait, no. I think if we turn around, like, because like this stuff is not going to matter if we go into this crazy storm.
Well, that would help.
And so there's like something about that
Yes.
like reigns true in the way that we like to talk about things. And this is why like oftentimes the conversations, I'm like, okay, this is like, I totally understand how this is incredibly meaningful for you right in this moment. However, like you said, turning around, like there has to be some sort of like, maybe we're not looking at the right place. I get that if we look right here, this might be the most important thing. And I get your perspective. However, if you like zoom out and realize that we're going to be hitting a storm of destruction, let's just maybe turn around, see if there's something else the other way, and how to get people off of that idea of like their blanket and their comfort is like the top priority. I don't know. I think that's where I think the fight, I guess you could say, for me is like how to actually say like, I get it. I know that this is important to you right now, but there might be something significantly more important. Like that's a great symptom that you're trying to help. Let's focus on the disease. Like that seems to be the pattern that I'm noticing.
Well, this turning around thing, first you have to think of turning around, then I guess you have to talk about turning around to the people around you to see if they agree with you about the problem and the solution. And then if there's enough of you, you might even get the ship to be turned around. And all it requires is us, talking and saying things and I guess asking philosophical questions if we don't want to, make a political speech. That all these, different ways that we could be doing. And I'm saying it's not that hard. In a way, we just ask questions.
I think no, I think that's a good point, Claire. I think the issue that I find is that in having these conversations of like the turning around process. Another analogy, because I just love analogies and metaphors, is like there's like a penguin who decides that like he's going to go off on his own from like the giant mass of horde of penguins because he knows that like if he stays with the group, they're going to all die. But he would rather go by himself and like try to find food or whatever. And if he spends time looking behind and trying to convince everyone in the horde to like follow him, then he'll never get there in time. And so there's like something about the way that our society has told us that we're supposed to be proving that the way that we're going is right. And then we're never going to get there, and they're also never going to join us. That like I think is getting in our way. And so how do we open up this new perspective by being that like leader of I'm going to turn around, I'm going to go to this new place, and not constantly have to prove to someone else. And that's what I think our conversations tend to be is like the questions seem to be, well, prove it, we'll prove it, we'll prove it. And it's like, okay, well, follow me on this journey for like 20 meters and then tell me if you have any questions. Follow me on this journey for another 20 meters and then we can like discuss more. I'm not going to continue to prove every step of the way. And I think that's what's getting us, I don't know, I think that's what's keeping us on this track instead of anyone ever turning their head in the different direction. I don't know if any of those metaphors made sense, but in my mind, they always seem to. Yeah.
Well, okay, you're thinking of this herd going in a direction that you don't want. You could decide, well, I'm obviously not going to be able to persuade, the leader. So you, and I want to go my own way. So you, if you're in the middle, you would move to the edges, and then you can, drop out. Or if you really want to do something, you would try and make your way to the leader penguins or the leader penguin and say, look, you're going the wrong way. Here's a better way. But I think the problem is we can say, I can't keep up, my feet are hurting, whatever, and you'll be ignored. But if you say, I have a better way, then they can't ignore you. They will have to consider it, because then, somebody might say, well, maybe, this person knows a better way. But obviously just complaining is not going to get you anywhere. And that I think, is essentially politics, because, saying, a better way will be, will attract accusations of, well, who do you think you are? You're not a good person. You hate us and you're stupid. And, well, how do you know? And then I guess if you're going to pursue it, you would have to say, to offer people some sound arguments and statements that they cannot deny. Like, well, but you were just complaining about the government a moment ago. Are you now contradicting yourself and saying, well, the problem's not so bad? Let's just continue the way we've been going all this time.
But how do you, going back to like the ship of fools analogy, like if you're the guy saying, let's turn this ship around, how do you not essentially offend the guy who says, well, I need my blanket now? Like, how do you speak of these ideas and not say, hey, what you're saying is actually irrelevant. Like, it's actually irrelevant to the larger picture of things. Like, how do you have conversations where you don't give that fool any, like time? Like, how do you do that? Like, gracefully?
Well, I don't know if grace is possible, because, to go with your analogy of the ship of fools, you would go to the captain, because he's in charge of the ship. He's the one steering the ship. So obviously, logically, you go to him, and he may or may not be wanting to listen to you. So I guess you do the nice cop, nasty cop thing. And of course, you always start off nice, and then, up the ante when that doesn't do any good. It's like, well, how would you feel, going down with your ship if it crashes into the shallows? I really think you're going the wrong way. Could you just, check with the charts, and maybe get, the navigator or whatever to confirm that, we are indeed going the wrong. I guess that there are these questions you could ask with your ship analogy. But then, of course, you might be, accused of mutiny, and bad stuff might happen. And but the thing is, we are women. That's not our problem. It's the men who have to do it. We don't have. We just goad the men into, in a Lady Macbeth way. Well, without the tragic consequences, I suppose. It's like, what are you doing? Just complaining like us. If you're complaining like us, you're not doing anything, are you guys? Stop being women. Stop encroaching on our territory. And then they might say, well, you stop encroaching on our territory. And I guess we might say, okay, so go and do your thing, guys. Go and talk to the captain.
So how do you encourage that of the men in society? Like, is it even our job to be the encouragers of that, or do we have to take a step back first? Like, what are the steps in that? Because I think that's also a big thing in my mind, is these, like, perceived gender roles and all the things of, like, you can do anything a man can do, and like we don't feel like, we're always butting heads and competing against one another. And I feel like there needs to be a working together of sorts. But then I think, what's the first step in that? Is that me taking a step back as, like, a woman and giving space, or is that the men taking up that space? Like, or is it something completely different? Is it, like where do you see that? Yeah, where do you see that?
Well, I would like to think that women could just be able to take credit for it, because lots of groups are going to get lots of blame for all kinds of things, and the finger of blame is shifting from group to group, and in the end, one will be in the wrong group. But as women, we could, we can complain about the men not being man enough, and the men will say, well, you're competing with us to be men, and we don't like it, and we don't like you anymore, and that's why we won't marry you. And I suppose our answer to that is, well, what is the point of men if they do not solve problems and take action? And the answer is, well, there is no point. I mean, because then they'll be transgender, right? I mean, why do so many of them want to become women? Because I think men, being primarily motivated by sex, they think female privilege is having more offers of sex than we're prepared to accept. And that's what they want. These transgender men think, well, I'd like to just sit there and look pretty and womanly and just wait for all the offers of sex to come in, and that would make me happy. But I mean, does it make women happy to have more offers of sex than we're prepared to accept? I don't think so. I think what we'd like is men to be like men and solve our problems for us and do these things that we want them to do, and they won't, because we're not behaving correctly, and obviously there are burdens of patriarchy, which obviously the men of today do not want to assume, because they seem to prefer pumping and dumping women and not taking responsibility and not becoming married fathers, because it's too much responsibility and not much fun. And also, what we are ultimately asking men to do is die for the principle of being men, which is to defend territory and defend property and defend women and defend children. And they're saying, because most of them are not married fathers, saying, well, we don't have any stake in the society where we have no wives, where we have no prospect of finding wives. So we're going to drop out of this. Thank you. Goodbye. And so I guess the only way for women to make men do what they want, what we want them to do, is to behave like women, which may not be that hard to do. We just have to know when to shut up. Yes. And to, yeah, I think so. And to communicate in non-verbal ways what we think they should be doing. Or now we can say what we want, until they get the message. I think, yes, we do have to, talk to them and explain what we want of men. And of course, the men will say, well, we're not up to scratch, and who wants to marry a woman and pay for their stuff and the children, and
yeah, no, I find this topic to be fascinating, because I think that like, as coming from like a biological perspective, like whatever is going on in our society between like the genders, like doesn't make any sense to me. And so I just think it's fascinating. But I guess, as I'm like, I guess I would consider myself to be an intellectual woman, and I very much bought into the how society sort of groomed me to be this, like, I can do anything, like I said, anything a man can do. I can speak my mind. I like went to school, I got degrees, like all that kind of stuff. But I think what I almost traded in doing that was my sense of like true femininity and like what it means to be an open and receptive person, because like I think in our systems we're like not told to shut up. We're told to speak more. We're not told to be like still. We're told to like do and act. And I think in that I developed this personality that is prone to like emasculating men in a lot of ways. And I think society as a whole is like working, against women and men in the same way, but just like in different directions. And so how does one like interact in these ways that we are right now, Claire, and not emasculate men? Like, how do we like open up a space, like be that womb for the change that is the action of the masculine energy? Like, I worry that like there's not a space for them first, but I also I don't know how to create that. I don't know what that looks like, but I definitely feel like there's something going on that is the opposite, both, anima and animus possessed on both sides. And so it's confusing.
Well, yes. I think the feminine stratagem is actually quite easy. We just have to restrain ourselves and not do the things that we want to do, in order to get men to do the things that we think they should be doing. And part of it is knowing when to be quiet. And the other main thing, which is much easier to do, is saying, well, we're not going to have sex with you until we have that ring on our finger, because I think that is ultimately the only thing that would make us desirable to them. If all of us did it, obviously, and then I guess this slut shaming thing, well, we have to look after that ourselves. But yes, I mean, most of us have had, a rather checkered sexual history. But again, this idea of turning back and saying we done wrong is always an option. I'm not claiming to be a virgin bride, but obviously, if we give them the impression that they're entitled to a free test drive, then of course they're going to carry on thinking they have a right to a free test drive, and they're never committing and moving on to the next one. And women also think, well, I will steep my way to the top. And see him as a starter husband, because women also think in these terms of disposing of their relationships. And so ultimately, marriage would concentrate the mind, because the gold standard of marriage is saying you can only choose once, and you have to choose well. And if you don't choose well, then I guess you'll be suffering a life of misery. So do choose properly and concentrate your minds and seek advice in so doing. And even then, things might go wrong. But, I guess that is fundamentally the gold standard, because that's the only way of supporting marriage. And I think, all the religious trappings of it is basically saying, well, because the sex act only takes, minutes to complete, if you look at the animal kingdom, a lot of people think they can get away with it. And of course, the idea goes back to the time of Moses, because the idea was that adultery was something that God had to forbid, in Mosaic times. So ultimately, it is a question of obedience. And I suppose if people did believe in God, then they would be more likely to obey than if they thought, well, nobody's going to find out.
This is all connecting actually a lot, Claire. It sort of seems to be connecting the consequences thing I was talking about before, how there doesn't seem to be a consequence to these sort of actions anymore, or not a perceived consequence, or not a accounted for consequence. And then this inability or lack of encouragement when it comes to accepting responsibility and being wrong, or like accepting accountability on things, and then how that sort of like choices, the amount of choices that we have, like whether it's like on, you know, the internet, or like the amount of like men in our community or whatever, or like the amount of things at the grocery store, all of it, the choices sort of like, again, sort of like are in place of that responsibility taken. We're just so focused on so many different things instead of the one person or the one thing or having the family. And I think it's the distractions, the lack of accountability, and then the lack of consequences because of that, that are just leading to all of these patterns that I think that you're describing right now.
Well, it's short-term thinking in a way, because I suppose, you know, if you do believe in God and the afterlife, you are, you know, this is the ultimate form of deferred gratification. And most people don't believe in it, and therefore they refuse to give up anything in this life, because they would feel fools for, you know, not accepting, you know, all these offers and opportunities that you know, I suppose God, if he exists, would forbid. And the thing is, a lot of people don't really know from one moment to the next whether they believe in God or not. I mean, I have a, you know, someone I've known for years, and he's adopted three positions, which is belief, disbelief, and doubt. So, but I suppose that's long friendships can be very helpful in the study of human nature, because I've known him long enough to notice that he's taken three positions.
I definitely think that we adopt faith when we feel like it's advantageous to us, which is not what faith is. And so I think it's an interesting concept.
It's hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Yes, it's actually hypocrisy, and I guess what I like about the Quran is that it says it has a chapter devoted to the discussion of hypocrites and saying the hellbound, and that, I think, just closes the escape routes of all the, you know, subversives, you know, in our, you know, chosen religious group, you know, the people who pretend to believe but actually don't, you know, so creative with excuses not to do what their religious principles tell them to do, which is basically to marry and be good parents, because, you know, whatever our religion, that's the only way of, you know, being a credit to our religious group. You have to produce, you know, young to, you know, replace yourself as, you know, we grow old and die. I mean, because it's you know, and the fewer you are of you, the less powerful you become. Yes, so I suppose in a way it is about demographics, and the Roman Catholic Church, I think, you know, is this sort of remnant of the Roman Empire, and
Right.
You know, it has so much history that kind of explains why you know, why things went right when they were going right, even without the Roman Catholic Church, and afterwards, you know, how it went, you know, slowly wrong, and I think, you know, we're still suffering from the consequences of it, because we haven't really acknowledged how difficult it is to hold our leaders to account if we don't codify the principles of our moral system. And I think, you know, Jews and Muslims have been, you know, quite helpful, because, you know, they've got the, you know, Muslims have the 5 pillars of Islam, and you know, Jews have the 13 principles of Judaism and the 10 commandments, and, you know, that kind of thing. So they can say, oh, hey, you know, leader of our religious group, you're not supposed to be doing that because it goes against the laws. But, you know, mean, the recent example for America must be MAGA. So Trump led Americans to believe that he would, end the endless wars and stop the uncontrolled mass immigration. And then he said, well, MAGA is what I mean it to mean. And who are you, Marjorie Taylor Greene, to hold me to account on what you thought I meant by MAGA? And MAGA is now split. Perhaps in the same way that Christianity split over the centuries, with people saying, holding on to the brand, but, not really too fussed about the principles.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would go back to like something I said on one of your live streams in the past of like, when something is split, it's much easier to be whatever, like demonically possessed. Like it's easier, like taken, like when you're a unit, when you have integrity, when you have atomic mass, like it's harder to colonize or whatever. And so like I think whenever we start splitting in this way, it's just a decisive way to keep people in almost like in line, because that's smaller numbers and easier to control. And so I think there's like something about the way that we've been encouraged to split ourselves, like as above, so below, like within ourselves and in even like politics, that just makes us easier to control by something that is the most loud and chaotic energy. Like, because we don't have something more powerful in us to help control that. Like, we are then guided by the loudest, most chaotic energy in the room, and that's not necessarily the most right. Most often, it's definitely not the most right, but.
It's because we have no convictions, and social media, they're feeding us all kinds of stories that are intended to, generate emotions, usually hatred and fear. And that, of course, makes us easy to control. But what should our convictions be? Or I mean, that ultimately, is the question. I mean, we could say, we want progress and justice, and that is universal, whether we believe in God or not. We want order and progress, but these words are again hard to define if we don't have a belief system that most people in our country are capable of agreeing with. And that's why we need to keep it simple. And, in a way, I don't see why it should be that difficult, because, logic would tell us that, if we're minded to worship a deity, it would be the most powerful deity that we can think of. And that would be the Abrahamic God, because I don't think anyone can think of a deity more powerful than the Abrahamic God. And of course we have to believe of him as being omnipotent and omniscient and perfectly moral. And we have to believe that he is benevolent in order to want to obey him. And if he thought, he was hateful or evil or sadistic, then we won't want to obey him.
Interesting.
And be more disposed to deny him.
But I think there can't be, I don't know, I feel like there can't be good without the hate, right? Like, I don't think there can't be the love without the hate. So at least in my view of it, I would actually feel like I would not need, but yeah, maybe like I would need a balance of the sort. Like I would need for there to be a potential of like, injustice for there to be justice, right? Like I feel like I would need that, but that maybe that's just like my humanness showing, where like I can't see a human without both of those sides, and therefore I can't see something greater than me without both of those as well. So that could be a very human way of thinking it.
Yeah. So I mean, my simplistic notion, which Scott has described as low resolution, is simply this: if you believe in God, then the whole purpose of your life is going to the better place in the afterlife, and the way to do it is obedience, and and that is, it really is as simple as that. And we will always be conflicted in that we know the good and we choose the evil, because our psyches are divided into three. If if you're familiar with Freudian theory about id, the id, the ego, and the superego. So even if no one is disagreeing with us, we often disagree with ourselves about what to do for the best. And it's sort of 33 point, it's a kind of pi number, isn't it? If you want to divide it into three. And so perhaps a suggestion is that we should be more in touch with the superego, that is, could be interpreted as God, than our ego and our desire to overeat, and all the things, the seven deadly sins, and that kind of thing. And of course it's easier said than done, but I think if we at least know the rules, then we would at least be telling ourselves off for overeating and being too lazy, and angry and envious, and all the rest of it. And these things are really not that hard to understand, in my view. But we have to keep it simple. And I suppose my problem with the Trinity is that the Trinity is totemic of being Christian, and that's why so many have to hold on to it. Otherwise they become the heretical Christian, but the low status Christian, the Unitarian Christian, that is not within the most powerful churches in the world, such as the Catholic Church, such as the Anglican Church. And our desire for status will often interfere with our ability to do the right thing.
So maybe I'm confused. What's your problem or issue with the Trinity as a concept, or what's the triggering part for you in that aspect?
Well, I suppose it's because Jews and Muslims think it's idolatry, and it's also very difficult to defend, because I listen to a lot of these spaces on X, and well, it's very difficult to defend, and I think the only way that the church used to win the argument was to burn the heretic at the stake, to prevent more questions, and of course this triggered the desire for Republican revolution, and that began, I suppose, in Cromwell's Republic, and of course the American Republic, and then the French Republic, and and the Russian Revolution, and I suppose if it's a black box system that you don't really understand, it's very difficult to defend, and then it means that you're not really convinced of its truth. Well, if it's logical, and then it all flows naturally, and I think even atheists actually say that. Well, they are in a way acknowledging that religion has its purpose, which is to control people, like it's a bad thing. I mean, I'm sure no atheist would say we don't need any laws to control people, because basically that's what laws are for. And we want to think that our laws are based on a moral system that is functional. And I'm saying the least your moral system should be doing for you is to support the institution of marriage in order to keep whatever group you are in existence, and distinct from others. If but of course all religions immediately create an outgroup.
Interesting. for whatever reason, this has like come up, and maybe it's a controversial thing to say out loud, but here we are. Um, when I think about things like nature and natural disasters that come in and like take out a population, and how there's this like seeming like epidemic of not wanting to get married and not wanting to procreate of a lot of the like the Western type like culture, and it's almost like, is this another plague of natural disaster that takes out a certain type of human that like maybe is like what the world is intending, or is this like a unnatural taking out of these human beings? Because like, who's to say that maybe this is like exactly what is needed to push forward a new way of thinking about certain like religions? I don't know, but we definitely seem to have come to a place where it feels like we're very certain on something, and it I don't know, it feels like that like flip. Like I don't know. Does that make sense? Like I don't know. I'm not trying to say that so. There's a natural disaster but there is a natural disaster of thinking, it seems, and I don't know. There's just going to be consequences somewhere. That's for sure.
Yes, I mean, what you said make me think of the mandate of heaven. I don't know if you're familiar with that idea. It's an ancient Chinese idea that was a kind of that actually functioned as the divine right to rule of Empress of China. So it's a presupposition. It's a presumption that all reigns of Chinese emperors began with a mandate of heaven. They all had the mandate of heaven, and it can be interpreted that the mandate of heaven is being lost if this emperor misused his power and didn't govern his empire properly. And the signs of that would be, as you were saying, natural disaster, pestilence, famine, revolution, and invasion. And when you have all five, well, that's your goose cooked, and the next emperor will be, will be presumed to have the mandate of heaven until he goes wrong, if he goes wrong. So that kind of does keep it simple, I think. And I suppose, with regard to, standards of sexual morality, I think it's all to do with the idea of causation, because, I'm sure, generations of people thought, well, I had sex with somebody, not my spouse. In fact, I have loads of people, not my spouse, and the sky hasn't fallen in, nothing bad has happened. So I'll carry on and encourage others to do it. And the thing is, when too many people do it, their intellects will be so corrupted that their instinctive reaction is to deny that there is a problem. And it seems that this is what we're that's why we get this pendulum of thinking it's all going terribly, and then you offer them a solution, and then they deny there's a problem, and which is a sign of neurosis, I think, and which is not to say that. Well, I just have this theory that you can have a kind of collective madness, because, in a way, we are members of a herd. And, I myself found that, having attended a football match or even a music concert, and I remember, at Wembley Stadium, and seeing this Mexican wave going round the stadium. And I thought, no, I'm not going to partake in this Mexican wave because it's stupid. But when it came to me, I felt like I was lifted up by some invisible force. Yeah. So maybe, we can't resist it, but, we could just begin by thinking of resisting it if we want to assert our moral agency and our free will, just to think about these things. and that's really all I ask, because I mean there's a verse in the Quran that says, maybe you shouldn't follow the religion of your ancestors in case they were Aztecs, but I paraphrase, because who, and also I come from a Buddhist Taoist background, and I suppose I have, because of my interest in politics, I have changed my beliefs over the years, and I think it is a good idea to think about these things, so you may eventually in the twilight of your years arrive at some in the vaguely right direction, even if you're not at the final destination. And I think if you can prioritize all these or order all these different religious groups, and fortunately there are only 5 major world religions, and they are the 3 Abrahamic religions and the 2 Eastern religions, and nobody talks about Hinduism and Buddhism because they have no empire, and the last 3 global empires have been Christian, and Europeans are the chief beneficiaries of organized religion if they want to measure their success in empire, and obviously both Christianity and Islam are imperial religions, but I think a lot of it is a mechanical problem, which is that if we want to hold our leaders to account, we need them to specify the details of the contract, and this is what a constitution is. That's what the constitution is about, and it would be just so tragic if Americans with their constitutional republic and their constitutional rights cannot change the direction of their ship, even if their captain has gone mad. Well, in theory, you should be able to.
Yeah, that's the idea. That's like what I think is the right way, is to be able to make that sort of change. But I think all the structures and the agreements that we've put in place have made that incredibly difficult, if not potentially impossible, to steer the ship a different way. And so, yeah, how do you then, I don't know, how do you then go forward realizing that, making that like instead of ignoring that, like how do you say like, okay, we're kind of screwed. How do we make it so maybe the next generation has it better? Because like I already know I'm SOL at this point, right? Like how do I turn enough so that at least the 2 generations after me can have a glimpse of what it might look like to be looking the different way? That's like the most I feel like I can give. Even
yes,
if
I mean that's my position. That's my position too. Really, I mean the most we can do as individuals is point in the right direction, even if we don't. If we, like Moses, never arrive in the promised land, we can, if we know the way, that the least we can do is say, well, that's a place we're supposed to go, even if we as individuals cannot arrive there. No, I actually don't think it's that different, because ultimately, it is a kind of gender war, but obviously, feminism has this idea that, which I think is fundamentally wrong, that the sexes are to be treated equally, because gender roles are foundational in any efficient functioning of the group. So it's even part of liberalism, because liberalism has this idea of free trade, and free trade has this idea that the country that is good at doing this should just specialize in, growing wheat, while, the other countries that are already industrialized, sell them, industrial goods. But of course, all countries want industrialization in order to get the wealth that they want. But in terms of society, obviously, women have a definite advantage over men at bearing children, and men have a definite physical advantage at soldiering and doing hard manual labor. And women would be complaining if men sent us to, defend territory and die defending territory, because if you take this idea of feminism to its nth degree, feminists would eventually start rejecting the idea of women being soldiers, or women being firefighters, and a lot of the things that require physical strength. Are we really saying that society would be run just as well if women went to war and men stayed home looking after the children?
I fear a lot of the things. I think I said this before. A lot of the things of feminism, they're like not doing what they think it's doing type of idea comes to my head. Again, I'm not super well versed in it, other than I sort of like link it into a lot of like the wokeism, a lot of the liberalism type of like stances, that if everything is equal, then there's no excellence, there's no discernment, there's no actual like progress. And so while I understand the sentiment behind it and why it would make sense, again, I don't think it's doing what it should be doing, and that is like the purpose is to give opportunity, but the opportunity to like achieve more goodness and more excellence. And I don't think that that's what everything equal type of thinking does, especially in like your own head. Like, as someone who, if I think all my ideas are equal, then I won't make any decision ever. Like, what then I won't take a step forward. And so there's like something about that idea that needs to be dismantled in some way to like still have excellence and goodness as like a top priority, because otherwise we're just gonna, I don't know, then everyone can speak. And in my mind, if you haven't thought about what you're gonna say, like you might not be someone who ought to be speaking in the council, right? And that's why for me, like, I get so nervous about speaking about things that I don't understand. And it's not because I'm necessarily afraid of being judged. It's because I am judging that I am not at a point where I'm supposed to be talking about this. That's inappropriate for me. And that is a discernment. That's not saying, oh, I'm not as good as whatever. It's like, I'm agreeing that that's not my place. And there aren't places in the hierarchy if everything is equal. And I think that's going back to your, child, brother, father, or mother, father sort of like hierarchy. Like, that doesn't exist when all is equal. I don't respect my father if all is equal. I don't respect my mother if all is equal. Like, and I think that's what a huge, I think that's what a huge downfall in this sort of movement is. It's the lack of the respect that I think comes out of that fear of the discernment. Yeah.
Well, I think women have it easy. We don't want, and the men, of course, don't want to watch us or listen to us, on our soapboxes. But we can ask questions to show that we are understanding what they're saying, and of course, they love being listened to, and they hate listening to us. But they do say that too. So we get them to talk. We ask them questions.
Why do you think that they, in your words, hate listening to us? What do you mean by that?
Well, I've heard men complain about how boring women can be when they talk about their, women things. But men can be also very boring talking about their sport. So well, I suppose it's just one of those things. But what I'm trying, I mean, obviously not all men are boring, and not all women are boring. But I'm saying, if we conform to type, women would just be talking about women things with other women, and I suppose when women are talking to men, they tend to be talking about their emotions, and I suppose this is something that, well, I actually, okay. I think a lot of men are talking too much about their emotions, but I guess they need to, in order to understand women, I suppose they feel they have to understand their emotions, and I suppose, listening to them, I tend to, bang on my table and stamp my feet, and I don't want to listen to men emoting. I want to, listen to them, talking about solutions and problems, and not, talking about their feelings. And but with regard to the gender war, I really think, as long as one group does what they're supposed to do, the other group will automatically do it too. It's like, just one sex just has to grab the right thing in the room, and because there's only one other thing to grab, the other group will just, grab their thing, and all will become right again. So I don't know if it's women or men who will be the one to grab the thing to make it all right again. And I do think, Megan, that today has been a milestone, in that, you're obviously, a very nice and attractive woman, and you are sincere, and you are intelligent, and you could have so much influence, um, just by asking the right questions, without even having to make a speech. And then all these men will be popping up and, saying, I have the answer. And then you can choose amongst them, but as they all, compete to have the answer that most pleases you. I think that must be the way to go, Megan.
No, this is kind of another reason why I wanted to talk with you, is because like coming into the TLC space, I not that it was like a perceived boys club by any means, but in my mind, I didn't really see a like space for quote unquote someone like me, or like a female presence. But I felt like if I am going to live by like the philosophies that I'm believing in, I think that there ought to be a role for both of those energies to exist in order for something to be actually created, instead of just like oraborically circle jerk type of like um, space. And so like how do you present yourself in a space like that? That's what I've been sort of trying to figure out, because I do believe that there's like a usefulness to this type of, sitting, listening, observing, asking, redirecting, and then allowing for action outside of me to like happen, because I think like that is the little part in my mind that's like missing, at least in the TLC space, but then very much in the at least in Western culture, like at large, and like how to properly align myself with that. I'm struggling with, but I'm curious about like constantly, because I don't know. I don't want to step in and be the, annoying woman that's just talking about the emotion type of things. I don't want to be seen as that or embody that, but I also don't want certain ideas to be passed over, and I don't want to colonize people. And I don't, like, how do you properly engage in these spaces? That's why I wanted to talk with you, because I feel like you definitely have a presence in these sorts of communities, and I'm just curious, like, do you believe that the way that you present yourself is like for the best interest of like the group, for the best interest of you, like, or is there anything, or is there a difference between those two things? Like, how do you perceive yourself going forward and interacting to like make these changes that it seems like you're very passionate about wanting to make?
Well, I think honesty and clarity is important. I mean, it just dawned on me talking on the Chris Howard stream that all our talk is basically we're just saying what we want, but indirectly, sometimes without even knowing what it is that we want, and we talk and talk and talk and hope that by talking we will finally arrive at a solution, but then our minds will not let us admit certain things to ourselves because it is shameful, it is awkward, it would mean doing something that we don't want to do, and then this Freudian theory thing again about three different horses dragging us in different ways, but I think ultimately people will either believe that what we say we are, or accuse us of different things. I suppose at the highest, I'm saying, I really want to help people. I see so many things going wrong. I think the solution is so easy, and people just won't see it, and that's why I have to, stamp my feet and bang on my desk and maybe we seem to be behaving in a mean way because if you're too nice, people will just ignore you and think everything's okay. And I guess that's why I do my nice cop, nasty cop thing. And also, yes, it could be completely self-serving. If I'm right about my analysis of what's gone wrong, I want at least to be acknowledged in this idea that I'm surprised hasn't already occurred to more people. So that's my explanation. That's my account of myself and my motives, which I guess is a mixture of the two.
I appreciate that honesty, and I think a lot of people will hopefully appreciate that too, because I think I've definitely seen the passion that you hold behind your, like I said, like your convictions that I find to be terrifying, because I grew up in the everything is equal. If I decide something, that means I like have to stand behind something, and that comes with a lot of integrity in a lot of ways to be able to stand behind something, especially when not a lot of people are believing the same thing or hearing it in the same way. So for that, I definitely like commend you and your ability to sort of put yourself out there like that. It's just, yeah, like how did you do that?
It's a compulsion. But perhaps it's a compulsion, based on a conviction that I am right, which people will accuse me of arrogance and conceit. But I like to think in defense of myself. I do present my ideas, and I do invite people to tell me what I've said that is untrue or illogical or immoral. And I think I've tried my best to make sure that in my mind, at least, that I have not based any of my ideas on anything that is untrue or illogical or immoral, and that would be my defense.
Yeah, no, and I think that there's definitely a balance of being able to be like a step back, that safe place for people to land their ideas, and then also the like filtering super far in and pointing at something. Like there has to be a little bit of that give and take. And I think, like from what I can tell, you are very good at like the pointing and maybe less about the holding. And I feel like for me, I'm like very much only a holding and not as much of a pointing. And so that's why I think I can learn from this type of interaction, because I think there needs to be a both and in that, so that you can offer this space for play and then also point to the best way to play, if that analogy even tracks.
Yes, being feminine, I guess, you're not the sort of shake them by the shoulders kind of person, and I sort of feel I have to do that, when I get this kind of, reaction of, oh well, it's too late now, it doesn't matter, and we. But the thing about conviction, I just have to uh, make the point that I think anybody with any convictions is liable to be accused of extremism and fundamentalism and being a lunatic. And I think the government actually wants us to feel ashamed if we have any convictions at all. And they're always saying to us, "What's wrong with you? Why do you have a conviction? Can't you see that the world is against you? Why don't you just go with the herd?" That's their unspoken message, which is why they call us names.
I think you're speaking to something really, really true. And when I was talking about like, oh, I feel like I'm afraid, not afraid of you, but like the triggering part of it is like, yeah, there is a lot of shame in having conviction. And I think that's something that I know I've definitely told myself as a woman, and I can't imagine any like males having that same sort of shame. And that's more or less their role is to have those types of like convictions. And so like the shame is probably a lot deeper in a lot of ways. And then having someone like you with that amount of conviction in these primarily like male spaces, I'm sure gives a lot of internal triggering and like inability to see where it's coming from. But I think that there's a lot of truth in that. Like, we're not allowed to, especially in Western culture, especially with cancel culture, especially with like that, women decide who they have sex with, right? Like they can just say like, oh, you said the wrong thing, you're anti this, like you're an incel, I'll never talk to you again. And I'm sure there's a
Mhm.
huge like underlying, whether like conscious or not, like in these areas, I'm sure that's like top of their psychic mind. So I'm sure you trigger people in that way too, because of the fact that you don't seem to have shame in your conviction. And that's wild, I think, for the Western mind right now.
Well, there've been, all these attempts, but it's true, isn't it? And prove me wrong if you don't. And they just seem to melt away and disengage. And this actually convinces me even more that I must be right, just because of this, reaction of refusing to argue and refusing to engage and telling the others to not engage. You see, and this reaction actually convinces me that I'm right. And and I think, a lot of mental health is about um, feeling that you're doing the right thing and nobody's lying to you, and the best people in your country are running the country. And they're not just being chosen because they are corrupt and incompetent. And obviously this is going to cause a lot of mental health issues if you think that you know your your government is malign and doesn't want you to have babies and mocks you for being a married parent or wanting to become one. And but I suppose, in a way, I'm just a boy cried who cried wolf, or the boy in the emperor's new clothes, and it's not that difficult really. Once the word is out, I don't see how they can win. They cannot win the argument. And this is something that I think ordinary people can do. Even if they're not practiced at political speeches, they can ask these questions and judge for themselves which in their number can give the answer that most corresponds with truth, logic, and morality.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. What is your perspective when it comes to playing the game of like hospitality and, I guess you could say, like kindness, in the ways of getting people to open up more about these ideas? Like, because again, I feel like you're a very action-driven, pretty like pointed person when it comes to asking your specific questions. And I find that it seems as though people take that as like abrasive and don't want to play with that. They don't want to play with the kid on the playground like that. How do you? Because it seems like you want to have conversations. You want to have the play. Like you want to be in. How do you see yourself like asking these questions as with as much conviction, but then playing that sort of like game? Or like, do you believe that we shouldn't be even having to play that game? That it like you should just believe that people are coming from a place of moral standing and wanting to know more and wanting to play? Or like, is there a need to be nice? To like where does that come in?
Oh yes, of course. Yes, and talking about hospitality, of course you should be open to people coming on your channel and saying what's on their minds, and also you have to be a good guest, because in order to get people to come on your channel, you have to go to other people's channels, and they have to kind of think you're you are of some value, and this begins by expressing things clearly so people know who you are, and whether they like you or not, they engage in the chat. And I suppose my experience is really more of being a guest, and knowing, I guess, whose channel to be on. I like Chris Howard's channel because I like the way he is prepared to engage without having a presupposition in his mind. He will actually think aloud, and it doesn't take too long because he's an intelligent man. Well, for other people, it would be a kind of circle jerk, and we know we're friends, and we can just talk nonsense for hours on end with a few words that kind of identify us as a group, and that's enough, without actually saying the thing that needs to be said, and proposing the action that needs to be done. And I see that, I suppose, as a form of neurosis, because you're just hanging out together for the sake of hanging out together, and you're not actually saying, you're not pointing to the problem, and you're not even discussing the solution. And I suppose that for me is what is triggering, because it's not even fun to listen to, because you're not really saying anything. And not that many channels do actually have proper conversations.
Is that because there's an expectation that these channels are like supposed to be having conversations that are supposed to be leading, and therefore you're saying, oh, they're not meeting expectations of like the defined constitution of the group? Like, is that the injustice that it almost seems like you're feeling? Or do you feel as though people shouldn't have you know what I mean? Like, is it because I guess I'll speak like that the TLC is like supposed to be like, our conversations are supposed to lead us into discovery, not keep us like, from, the thinking about death and dying type of thing? Like what's your discomfort with it, I guess?
No, I'm certainly not complaining, really. I mean, actually quite a lot of members of the TLC have been hospitable. I've engaged with them, and they may not like me, but it's sort of, well, I still get back. I'm not banned from their channels, so I can't really complain. But I'm just saying, in terms of their communication with each other. I mean, I suppose I went a bit crazy in today on Brett's channel, because no, it wasn't Brett, it was Olsen's channel, because I think they were talking about, well, the younger generation don't think much of us doing our dad talk, and I think it went from there. But I'm saying, it's communication between the generations that is important as well, and obviously, the fathers of TLC, as you would expect, they would congregate together because they would have more in common with each other, and the younger ones have different issues and prefer to have their particular conversations, and lacking this intergenerational communication would stop the problem from being solved, in my view, because there are these different styles of communication with different words that maybe need to be explained, like lol cow.
Yeah. No, I definitely believe that like there's a space that is needed for just like, sameness in like community building of like, almost like a homing type of feeling. But I do agree that like there does need to be a little of like an expansion of perspective. And so that's why I'm like, how do you how do you feel like you're going to start playing into that new perspective and like getting people to talk more? Because that's what I want to be a part of, is like having new perspectives come in, I think.
Right. Well, I mean, I think just talking about what's on our minds, will be enough to propel this flotilla. I really think it is. It's that so many people take such a long time to get to the point, and that, I guess, is one of the things that drive me crazy. But of course, people have different levels of verbal communication and whatever, and people will say what they need, and of course I am maybe psychoanalyzing them a bit too much, and and I know Luke Thompson resents me for that, but I think what is all this talk but try to say what's on our mind. And if we're going to do that, we should say it clearly. And if people don't agree with us, we should, either concede we're wrong or defend our idea to the death. Not to the death, but to destruction, is what I'm saying. So if I really believe in this thing and you don't agree, we should be able to argue about it. And at the end of it, people who listen to us might say, well, you won or I won, and give reasons, which would be a rational thing to do, and it shouldn't be because Megan's younger and prettier, or we don't like Claire for reasons we can't say. It should be what arguments did you use and what arguments did I use, and why they're better or worse, or that would be a kind of rational way of just resolving disagreements, I would have thought. But it never gets there. Certain words are said in passing, and then the it goes back into chit chat, I suppose.
Yeah, I think there's a like disgust, I guess, of like having this type of like conviction, or having this type of need to prove, because I think it's like, I don't know, it comes off as, I think ultimately it's because we think in such black and white thinking right now. I don't want to speak necessarily for TLC in general, but I know in my like upbringing, like black and white thinking was kind of like the way. It's like it's either Claire's right or I'm right, and like there's no in between. And I think when it comes to like discussion or communication or conversation, it should be, like you said, like you're having conviction in this one idea, but eventually it's going to be a breakdown of everything, and then you reconstitute with a different idea really about everything. Like that's why you're supposed to talk it almost to its logical conclusion, so that you can break it down and then phoenix from the ashes, right? And so I think what you seem to be speaking to is this, like, we're not breaking down and therefore we can't really phoenix anything. But I think it's because, if I'm seeing this correctly, it feels like we have to decide it's either this or that. And I think it's like both and neither at the same time, most of the time. And that's why it's hard to have conversations often with people because they want to tell me for sure it's this or for sure it's not that. And I don't think that that's how the world works. But I'm not sure about that either. So
well, no, I do understand. I mean, it can come across as arrogant, like, well, how do you know you're right? And I'm saying, prove me wrong. And I suppose that, when I detect people saying, I know I'm right, but I don't want to argue about it.
I don't
And
want to
if you
talk about
argue
it.
with
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
there will be social consequences. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. And I think, well, then it means you don't have any convictions because, really, if you think you are so right, you should be prepared to, defend your ideas. And I suppose that's where Luke and I disagree because I am interested in his universalism idea, but he doesn't want to discuss it with me, and but these are different styles of communication, and sometimes you do need to decide. You do need to see whether which side of the road you're driving on, to know should an accident occur, which driver is to blame when the accident occurred. So these divisions are necessary, even in political discourse.
I think you're right in this because I think it's talking about this idea again, like of discernment. Like if you're not able to come to a conclusion that maybe Claire thinks more this way and Megan thinks more this way, then like you can't discern whether you want Claire as a part of your group or not, right? And so there's this weird like keeping the lines blurred all the time actually means that there's no real creation of solid community building. Like if everyone's allowed in, that's why I've been talking about this like semi-permeable type membrane thing where like you have to have some boundary there somewhere. But if you're not able to talk about the particulars of the things or use these discussions to get closer to that boundary making, then nothing matters. Nothing like that you think is better can come in and have a better version of the cell or the body or whatever on the other side. And so without that discernment, then there's no excellence, there's no building something, there's no next step. And I think that's what the aim should be.
Well, sometimes we don't really, I mean, we're wearing different hats at the same time. And of course, we owe TLC to PVK, and it's his thing. He named it. And what I guess it's intellectual foundation is Jordan Peterson, right? I mean that's how most of us heard and came to TLC because we wanted to talk about Jordan Peterson, whether we agreed with him or not. And Jordan Peterson also represents something in Western thought about conservatism, Protestantism, maybe a bit of imperialism. But these matters are not decided, but they're all clues about what are the current concerns of, I think, in particular Western men, because Jordan Peterson is about Western men. He is about telling them to tidy up their room, and that kind of thing. And so and I think fundamentally it is about Western masculinity, and about who gets on the flotilla or not. It is up to PVK, but I think he intends to run a broad church, and that I think is part of his success. And perhaps if he were to say, oh, I don't want this person on my flotilla. It probably wouldn't work, because if you say that, then it will make people want to talk to that person, like why, and ask all these questions. So it's probably better to just keep making the flotilla bigger, because actually it's quite hard to control. It can't be if PBK said, well, I don't want, so and so here, you all have to block them and, never speak to them again. Well, it's not possible to do it anyway in practical terms, and it would not widen the discussion. And I think, TLC is a very important demographic in America because, well, I mean, if you were to ask me what I would like from the TLC, it is really to get me on Tucker Carlson. I said that to Chris Howard yesterday, I think, and I suppose that's really what I hope Americans might try and do, because I suppose it is, my big idea, and he seems to be the most powerful intellect in the whole of America. There may be others, but he's certainly, someone I do have an enormous amount of respect for.
Well, we love that as a goal for you. I don't know how that'll happen, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't mind. Yes, but obviously I have to work my way up to it, and I noticed that PVK, when he was talking about talking to President Foxman, he was basically, yes, they were talking about exorcism, and I think he did make a reference to me about how there was a certain person whose demons he would like to exorcise, and I thought, well, he's very welcome to do it on his channel, and I'm very happy to present myself to him if he wants to ask me increasingly difficult questions about my objectives and my ideas, and how I see it actually happening within my lifetime, that sort of thing. So I suppose I'm just I will keep rolling forward until I can no longer do it, because I suppose I have these questions that I hope to get an answer to.
Well, I respect that journey that you're on. That's for sure.
Well, I hope this show is in some way entertaining, and maybe informative, and I hope I am doing some good, even if I'm not the most popular person, in TLC, and the just sort of working out of individual issues that maybe to do with politics and religion, is probably a way of us staying sane, that we think we're at least trying to solve the problem and think things through, and hopefully enough people might agree with us about whatever we think is a way forward. And
Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of things to talk about and work through, and I don't think anyone right now seems to have all the answers. So I'm willing to kind of talk to as many people as possible to get somewhat closer to even a fraction of the reality that my body is somehow experiencing. So this is just a great example of, I don't know, just something that has helped me sort of expand my mind. And so I'm appreciative of you being able to talk to me today. That's for sure.
Well, yes, thank you so much, Megan, for coming. I will be just going through the chat because my attention was completely, taken by what you were saying, and I've completely ignored the chat, and they're probably, quite cross at me for not acknowledging their existence, and I'm very happy that they came and posted so energetically in it, and you're very welcome to stay if that's what you'd like to do, but yes, so and I'm so grateful to you, because I think you're the first female that I've had in a long time. I'm just trying to think of previous females, and but that's and of course you are courageous and honest and sincere, and I think that should be enough. If there are enough people who are prepared to ask the questions and honestly assess the quality of the answers that they receive, I think it could all turn right in the end.
Yeah, I feel like if I can be one thing, I can at least be an example of how you don't have to know what you're talking about like at the deepest level to still feel like you can have a good conversation with somebody. Like I don't know all the topics and the labels of the things that you are talking about, but it doesn't mean that we still can't connect over something a lot larger and a lot more meaningful. And so if anything,
Mhm.
we can talk
Yeah.
about anything, even speaking different languages.
Yes, and the thing is, even if we're not quite clear about what we're saying, or we're just thinking it out, this will actually invite somebody to steelman our argument, I think, and this is something that Luke Thompson talks about. You have to, so and this begins with, so what you're saying is, and you give the best possible, interpretation of what that person is trying to say, so that they won't disagree with you, and then that person will feel listened to and maybe do the same to you, and without assuming that you mean the worst possible thing when you say your thing that they don't quite agree with. So yes, and I've certainly learned a lot from from TLC, and yeah, and yes, I actually want to thank people for being hospitable. They have been certainly patient, and I'm still talking to so many of them, and they haven't banned me from their channel, so I'm grateful for these small mercies. And yeah, thank you so much, Megan, for coming here, and for your courage and your sincerity, um, and your youth.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'll probably hop off, but if you still want a monologue, I'll be listening.
Okay, thank you so very much, Megan.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Double the estrogen, double the fun, as it has proven to be. Don't you agree? Oh, it rhymed. Pick and Choose says, I'm skeptical of your claim that religion has always been primarily about policing sexual behavior, etc. There have been plenty of ancient religions with very different perspectives on sex, but they're now extinct, are they not? Pick and Choose. And Young God says, the thing that keeps things going are the babies, technically. Protestants ruined the West. Actually, I don't agree, because if you think of Protestantism as the part of the Whig interpretation of history, and the Whig interpretation of history is a kind of sacred belief of liberals that liberals are progressing towards a liberal heaven of absolute personal liberty that is combined with order and progress. And I think we already know that the problem with liberalism is that we don't know when to stop with liberty. And I would define liberty as what we ought to enjoy after all the necessary laws are in place. And liberals will never agree with each other about what are the minimum number of absolutely necessary laws, and they will either have too few or make too many, and then become an oppressive tyranny. And I'm just saying, God, if he exists, would be the person most informed of what is the absolute minimum of liberties we are entitled to enjoy. And I'm saying Jefferson kind of said it in the Declaration of Independence when he talked about the certain unalienable rights of men created equal. So I think the history of the American Republic gives some indication, since even now Americans, well, some Americans, and it is found on, dollar bills, that Americans are one nation trusting in God. So I'm going to toot my horn about secular Quranism again, and I'm saying what the different states of America should do would be making it a point of policy to ensure that residents will be they don't have to. They want to avoid a brain drain. They want, they don't want a brain drain of their best people to different states of America, and I think, and that would be a good way of keeping Americans within communities. And you can't have communities without families, and you can't have stable communities without stable families, and you can't have stable families without stable marriages, and you can't have stable marriages without the abolition of no-fault divorce. So I guess we all need to know that too much liberty is a bad thing, and I think we're beginning to understand that liberty is, well, too much liberty leads to the law of the jungle, and maybe a Mad Max world where the strong get to eat the weak and kick them around. And there can be no redemption without the error in the first place. And I guess it's something old people say when they refer to their wisdom and experience and what they talk about. And when they talk about their experience, they mean their mistakes that they have learned from. Your comments are much appreciated. They really are. Oh, Teo seems to have enjoyed himself. Thank you for calling this a treat. Pick and Choose says, I think Claire is conflating the cultivation of a genuine moral compass, what Goldsby is talking about, with a way to ensure a morally harmonized society. I don't think I understand this. Don't they mean the same thing? Isn't the purpose of a moral compass to ensure that the society that you're talking about is heading the right way? So I think that they are the same thing. Please say why you don't agree. Morality is ultimately internal. It's an instinct, the inner compass, the conscience has primacy. Since we can't read minds, that's where rules and authorities come into play, but that's not the source. Yes, I remember this argument I had with this friend, and we were discussing morality, and he said, it's just a feeling. And I remember blowing up at him. It's just a feeling? You think religion that maintains morality is just a feeling. I think what is meant is we know, we somehow feel, and I think children begin to talk about, begin to understand justice when they start complaining about things not being fair. And it has been said that I think it went, a dog understands, even a dog understands whether the kick it received was intended or accidental. So what I'm saying is, it is the role of government to ensure that most people believe that they enjoy justice. Of course, there's going to be people who are complaining about things not being fair, but the point is, if you get most of the people thinking that you are governing your country properly, then you are doing a reasonably good job. That's all I'm saying. So we have all these, ideas and standards, and I think it's necessary to define them. So law is obviously the lowest standard of morality, in that, if you fall below the legal standard, you become a criminal. But you can be legal and still immoral, right? But at least where to put that person whom you think is, well, he's not quite a criminal, but I wouldn't trust him with my money, daughter, whatever. I'm not sure what you mean, Yoav, by saying men are testable. I suppose you mean all men need to, well, to be a member of that group, that man will be assigned a role, whether high status or low status, and then they will be expected to perform the responsibilities and duties connected with that role. And so people know what they're supposed to be doing. Of course, there will come a time when a lot of men think it's unfair, but then it's also up to them to organise. But you can only organise after you have identified the problem and have a solution. It's not enough just to complain, right? You have to say, this is a solution, and my solution is better than all your stupid solutions, and therefore I win, and you should listen to me. Something like that. Stephanie says, I must not understand the meaning of the word patriarchy correctly. I can't understand why any woman would want to wish for the return of a patriarchal society. So patriarchy is a society prioritizing the preferences of married parents who want to properly parent their legitimate offspring. And the antithesis of patriarchy is matriarchy, and matriarchy is a society that prioritizes the preferences of non-parents and unmarried parents who casually conceived and parented their illegitimate offspring. And if you accept my definitions, you would have to acknowledge that the children of patriarchy will be better than the children of matriarchy, and that's why you can have rising civilizations and why you have declining civilizations, and it's all to do with the eugenic practice of marriage. And I know feminists have more or less equated patriarchy with domestic violence. But even if this were true, because you could argue that, well, if women suffer violence in the home, it would be because of some man who is their husband or their brother or their father, right? Okay, be that as it may. But I think even if this were the case for a significant minority of women, I think even in such a society there would be that society is more likely to enjoy the rule of law, and by that I mean a lower crime rate, because women don't want to be mugged on their way home. They don't want to be, I guess, raped on the way home from a night's clubbing or whatever. So even if you do manage to displace the domestic violence, there will be, other forms of male violence for women to contend with, even if it's not in the home and even if it's from men they don't know. So, maybe in a way, we have no choice. Not that I'm saying, women should be beaten. I do actually have my interpretation of that wife beating verse in the Quran, which has acknowledged the existence of that verse without interpreting it away. So under secular Quranism, if a wife is so bad that her husband should think about beating her in order to chastise her or make her amend her ways, I'm saying it would just be a ceremonial wrist slapping. So he would just call her side of the family and his side of the family, and make known his complaints about his wife, and the wife can defend herself, and at the end he can slap her wrist and say, well, if you don't improve, it will be the divorce courts, and now everybody knows what my problem is. I think it's fair enough, and probably it just won't get as far as that, right? It's embarrassing for the wife to have this kind of wrist slapping ceremony, which won't mean getting a black eye or having any broken bones or any of that. So I think a creative interpretation of the Quran can actually interpret the violence away. So I don't know why Muslims haven't thought of it, but there you go. And actually, women can even interpret it as a kind of feminine privilege, in that women have all these warnings. Wives have so many warnings. It's like, if you're not doing as he wishes, then he will admonish the wife, and then he will sleep apart from her, and then the wrist slapping, the ceremonial wrist slapping. And I'm saying, as a woman, it seems to me to be fair enough. And in most cases, it just wouldn't get as far. So the purpose of patriarchy is that it is hierarchical. So everybody will have their assigned role, and if there's a problem, it can be identified immediately, because the military is based on this pyramid system. So the general gives the orders, the officers pass the orders down, and the lower ranks either obey orders or they don't. And if they don't, they can be easily identified. And this is the whole point of it, so that problems will be identified early rather than too late. And I'm saying, well, it's probably too late now, right? I mean, I like to think it isn't, But if people can't even talk about what I'm saying, whether or not they agree with me, then I would have to conclude that in America and the rest of the West, there are fewer men who want to become married fathers than there are men who do not wish to become married fathers. And because of this demographic, that the problem will never be corrected, and things will go from bad to worse, which would be very sad, because I am also myself a product of the Anglo-American Empire. And obviously I would love it if my ideas could be considered. I'm not asking anybody to agree with me. I'm just asking them to consider my ideas and ask themselves whether they are based on sound arguments. Maybe I've got a thing wrong or to here or there, and my ideas are based on some false premise. I don't mind if you want to point that out to me. So contrast the kind of society where most men want to be married fathers because they see marriage as a way of acquiring status and probably long-term happiness. So most men will want to do that, and most men will want to support it. But now, most men would rather not be married because they don't think they can afford to buy property. They think even if they're found to be worth marrying by most women, they might be swindled out of their property with the rules of no fault divorce, for which I have the solution, which obviously requires discussion and propagation. I'll be back in a minute, but I will continue with this for a while. Right. To continue with the issue of women wanting to return to patriarchy, it would just increase the chances of women getting married and staying married and making men more marriageable if women had higher standards of sexual morality. That would be how it would be corrected. And I suppose right now most men don't want to marry, and therefore there would be, I guess, a majority of men wanting to maintain the status quo of matriarchy, which means that the men who have no intention of becoming fathers, who are not marriageable, are in the majority, and the ones who do want to marry are helpless to do anything. So that's what it means for you as a country, and that would be, I guess, embarrassing and low status, and this would mean that your women will tend not to have legitimate offspring, or if they do marry, they will be marrying out. So, it's just something to think about, really. If you're taking this whole thing seriously about, continuing the existence of your group and keeping it apart from others. And of course, women are key to the next generation. They are the filter, right? They are the filter. And that's why you have to maintain the gold standard of marriage, or, well, the filter won't be working, and all kinds of what is a marriage license anyway? It is about licensing sex and children, and with the implication that those without a marriage license, are not supposed to be having sex and children. And of course, it is a eugenic filter of the next generation. And of course, women are the ones who are supposed to. It's their role, basically. It's their role, and that's why the marriage ceremonies are really for the women. Men don't tend to enjoy these things so much because, of course, the bride is star of the show, and because of the importance of this ceremony, women would be, told that they couldn't possibly not be able to tell the difference between sex before the wedding ceremony and sex after the wedding ceremony. It's this kind of thing. And that, I think, as an amateur anthropologist, what all these rituals are all about. And as I was saying, patriarchy is a society that is mirroring the military, and, well, if you care about defending your country against invaders, you would want your military to operate at maximum efficiency. And so it is really for the protection of the women. And maybe we all have to make, certain sacrifices, and all of us, not just men. I mean, obviously the men don't want patriarchy. They don't want it at all. They prefer to pump and dump us, right? That's what they really prefer to do. Patriarchy or bust. I'm sure there are other options on the table, such as partneriarchy. Well, I look forward to your YouTube channel explaining what it means. But the point is, it doesn't have to be, men just bossing women around, because weren't men more gentlemanly when they, when more people were married and had legitimate children, Stephanie? What wasn't that the case? They were just sort of more, yeah, they were more gentlemanly. I don't quite understand this. But I think what Stephanie may not like is maybe this idea of okay, I'm talking about Ann Coulter here because she was publicly entertaining the idea of giving up her vote because she did say, and I got this idea from her anyway, that if women couldn't vote, there would never be a Democrat government. And she advanced arguments that are basically unarguable. Well, you can't prove her wrong on how women tend to vote for more lowering of standards of sexual morality and is most indifferent to uncontrolled mass immigration. And yeah, and this is fundamentally the difference in thinking of the sexes, because I guess men's interests are more threatened by immigration than women, because women are kind of protected because they expect men to protect them, so they sense they don't feel so immediately threatened as men do about uncontrolled mass immigration. The word patriarchy to me evokes fears of being subjugated and disempowered. Yes, and well, I guess, Stephanie, that men would say that in a matriarchy, it evokes fears of them being subjugated and disempowered. So we have to have a fairer system, and this fairer system does seem to involve the horrid practice of marriage and parenting, because it's only through individual couples that you get a society that understands how the thing is supposed to work, um, and obviously, who you choose to marry will have an effect on your happiness, and that's why you're supposed to choose carefully, and this is important for both men and women. But the point of marriage is that it stops us from hookups, right? It would stop us from hookups. It would make obsolete all the dating apps, which are designed to make us go back to it again and again, with the carrot of a better partner dangling in front of us. I don't understand your question about having 3 male children. Perhaps Yoav will talk about this on his channel. Yoav is being very modest here about Jordan Peterson. Women, Teo, will always be complaining, but in a matriarchy, women will complain and not give men the power that they need to solve problems. So if men are in fact the people most easy to accuse of misconduct, then you shouldn't be too surprised that men will take the risk-averse approach and not really try anything much. Oh, don't call my guest, pray. She's a very nice lady, and she's sincere, and I'm so grateful to her that that we had a proper conversation about these things. And really, ultimately, I think, in the end, it will be women who will solve the problems, because I think what I've said is not too complicated for most people to understand. And it's really about obeying certain rules of sexual conduct. And of course, I know a lot of people think, well, it's our sacred human right now under liberalism to enjoy recreational sex with people we're not married to. No, but okay, what I have in mind, I don't think it's too oppressive. I really don't think it's too oppressive. And I hope you'll look at secularcoronism.blogspot.com to have a look at a virtual America that has adopted secular Quranism. And please do comment. It will please my streaming partner, Vincent Bruno, a spacing partner, I should say now, because he's mostly on X Spaces. But I just want you to know that, he's a married gay man. So he couldn't be more different to me. But at least he understands my ideas. Men stop going to therapy. Well, I think it has religious implications, because, therapy is about confession, right? So the Catholic Church, probably got it right by saying, well, you have to confess your sins once a week. Oh, praise from Teo. Thank you. So Stephanie talks about artificial wombs. The thing is, why would you? Who's going to get those artificial wombs? And why can't you do it the natural way? And isn't there something a little? Well, those of us who've been pregnant, I mean, it is possible to enjoy your pregnancy. And of course, it's when, a woman thinks, I wonder if the baby kicking in my stomach could be a genius. Well, all these sort of questions, and people speculating on its sex, and, that's part of the fun, I would have thought. Oh, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for saying that I behaved well and been a good host. What are you saying? Am I going to have to start the office of official non-secular partnerism? Yes, you have to. And you have to start your own channel. And then I'll come and troll you from time to time. Ha, ha. All these kind comments from Teo. It's been a good day. Oh, hello, Luke. Is PVK doing his thing on Friday? Is he doing it? Oh, more compliments from Teo. Luke asks, show me those universal truths. Where do they exist apart from the okay, the universal truth. Okay, my conviction is that the Quran is the best available guide to humanity, and if you don't agree, kindly provide me with a better alternative. Yes, I do want you to talk about universalism, if only to admit that you're wrong. That's what I would like. That's why I keep coming after you, Luke, because it's so obviously wrong. Or the only way to make it sound right is my system of afterlife administration, meaning a third category of purgatory wherein reincarnation takes place. And I don't know, Luke, if you believe in reincarnation or not. Will Claire admit she is wrong about who named TLC? Well, I said PVK named TLC, didn't he? Well, Jordan Peterson is ill again, and he's kind of dropped out of being the Pope of Protestant social conservatism. So I don't know what Protestant conservatives are going to do now that they've lost their semi-religious leader. Well, at least Teo, understands my strategy. Yep. I wouldn't mind Ann Coulter, but I guess she's not that big a deal anymore. Well, I mean, I just hope that people at TLC would like to try to get me on Tucker, but first I have to go on PBK, right? So I think you can get it. You can get that to happen by popular demand or unpopular demand. Oh, thank you, shoulder surf. I'm getting a surprising number of kind comments, so thank you. Thank you for saying that you like me being around. Well, I do want to deal with the chat because I think the chat is quite important, and I do get quite cross when people ignore me in the chat. Okay, I'm getting to the bottom of the comments now. No, I won't be saying anything against Megan, who has been courageous and sincere, and I just appreciate being understood and not being strawmanned, and it's a very rare experience. So I will be eternally grateful to Megan. Still scrolling to the end of the comments. Okay, finally I get to the end. Thank you all for coming. And thank you for saying I could have dealt with a chat. And thank you all for taking an interest. Thank you.